Welcome to Future Ready Live, where we talk about topics that will help CPAs, CGMAs, and their organizations prepare for change and transformation. I'm your host, Tom Hood, the EVP of Business Engagement and Growth at the AICPA CIMA, the largest global body of professional certified accountants in the world. Today, we're going to be talking about the impact of Gen AI on finance and accounting jobs. Joining me is Lisa Simon. She's the chief economist at Revelio Labs. She's an economist, data scientist, and policy expert with over 10 years of experience in research, econometrics data analysis, casual inference, and public policy consulting. Currently, she's helping build and leverage the world's first universal HR database at Revelio Labs, and her previous research was on the future of work, labor, and education economics. Lisa, say hello to our audience.
Hi, thanks so much for having me here.
It's exciting to have you here. And so I met Lisa at a ASAE CEO issue symposium focused on AI, and her research fascinated me with what we're all asking about is what is the impact of AI on accounting and finance, and how do you start to think about all this? So she has an interesting presentation that talked about adoption and exposure. And so I'm going to ask you, how do you define this idea of AI exposure versus adoption? And why do you think accounting roles have low adoption despite what you show is moderate exposure?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks so much for having me on here, Tom. Very excited to talk about some of this research. The really idea behind AI exposure is to put a little bit of a framework to understand to what extent does AI actually impact certain occupations, and we really do that by breaking down jobs into what we call their atomical parts, and those are really activities. So if you think about like all the things that you do throughout your day or week, really, and sort of list them out, we can do that basically at scale for all jobs in the economy at Revelio Labs. And basically just classify them into, is AI actually good at doing this or not? And can AI, do this potentially better than you can? And there's certain areas in your job where, yes, AI can do this probably better than you can. And there's areas in which, no, you probably do that better yourself. And that's the idea of AI exposure. So basically just taking a share of activities that can be done by AI. And in the case of accounting, it's actually sort of like a moderate exposure, like you say. So there's certain roles that really have very high exposure scores of over 60-70% or so that are in data science or really very technical roles, because it turns out that ChatGPT is just excellent at coding and debugging code and things like that. And there's certainly other roles that are more manual and more sort of in person, really in nature, where you do rely a lot on these social interactions and or manual work, really. So they're not very exposed to AI. And accounting really falls somewhere in the middle, more on like the high end, of course, being the professional occupation that it is. So basically moderate exposure, 50% or so of activities we think could be potentially augmented or helped by AI. And we can talk a little bit about which ones we think that is and aren't. But what's interesting is when you juxtapose that with adoption. So basically actually look at, to what extent do people actually use these tools, and basically just get a share of people in accounting that mention using AI. You fall off a little bit further off sort of to the lower adoption range. And I think that has a lot, of course, to do with the nature of the job, which is highly regulated. Legal and data security concerns come to mind. So I think there's a ton of reasons why, in theory, accounting could be done using AI to a larger extent. but we're just not quite there yet, or perhaps we're also not measuring it right. So I think those are topics worth exploring.
Well, I mean, historically, we do tend to have lower adoption rates. We're very conservative, so we don't necessarily jump to the latest thing that's going on. And that was part of the conversation I think we were having that day. So I think, I mean, it was fascinating. But the other part of this is about the notion of, if we did adopt it faster, what could that mean and everything. So talk about, I know you talk about specific barriers that prevent accountants or other occupations from adopting AI compared to others. How could we start to address those barriers? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think to answer that, it is probably helpful to think about the parts of the job that could be that AI could be really good at. And those, of course, have a lot to do with just sort of all the standardized things around monitoring and reporting and analysis and documentation. So, and also the other parts, right? That you really do want to retain that human touch and interaction, which has a lot to do, of course, with advisory and education and maybe thinking through edge cases and particularly hard problems, and sort of really being a partner there for for both your clients and business partners there. So I think that the barriers to using AI come from the fact that a lot of what accountants do is so regulated, and really what your one main job is making sure that it's certifiably correct. And I think for now there is sort of a healthy skepticism, which I think is completely rightly in place, around accuracy and data security. So I think the profession as a whole is sort of this problem to solve, if you will, that figuring out where can AI actually really help. And I think that is a lot in the reporting and just automating a lot of the analytics and monitoring, but in a way that is data secure and makes sure that any sort of fabulations, anything from AI, get more highly penalized, right? So you absolutely want to be, less creative and more accurate. So I'm sure you can tune these models to just serve a purpose that is a lot more in line with what you're looking for, as opposed to your sort of off-the-shelf, box ChatGPT tools, anything like that. So I think really understanding, where, and then making tools that probably, address these things. And I think, the gains from it are potentially really large, right? Because you could, I happen to know that I think there's sort of quite a talent shortage. I understand it in accounting, right? So doing more with less probably doesn't sound like a terrible notion, right? So
Huge.
Figuring out, right, like these things are automatable, and then you can really dive into the things where you can actually add your expertise and really make a difference, as opposed to the more tedious, perhaps, reporting and analytics parts.
Yeah, I mean, so it's funny. You're like laying out exactly the case that we're seeing, right? Which is, most of our profession is beginning to, we would say, move up the value chain and get more into that advisory, finance, business partner, strategic accounting, and away from transactional accounting. And what you're describing is AI and technology in general will take care of basically the transactional side, getting the transactions in and in the right place and looking for anomalies and all that. That's where AI could be huge. And then that leads us more to the judgment side, telling the story of what the numbers mean from that standpoint. So it's kind of an interesting. So I mean, it's spot on, and it is what we're talking about. That's a conversation we're having right now in our entire profession. So it's kind of interesting. But your research really highlights that impact that, we have roughly the 50% exposure level, but with a low adoption rate, that puts us at risk. So we've got to start adopting and beginning to move into different job categories to preserve our value, if you will, as a profession.
Absolutely. And I think it sort of gets interestingly highlighted when you compare to, similar occupations like along the same like exposure axis that are also in finance, right? So the financial advisors or consultants, I think they have sort of a similar, share of tasks that could be done by AI. They're not the same tasks, of course,
Right.
but there's some overlap. And I think because they might be just a slightly less regulated and a little bit, just maybe more free in using the tools that they choose to use, they get higher exposure and are sort of just able then to just jump on this bandwagon probably a little bit quicker and just make more use of these tools and make themselves more productive. I think that's sort of been my phrase to use. It's not about displacement, right? I think that's really this really interesting part where people are a little bit afraid of, AI is going to take our jobs. But I think AI is only going to take your jobs if you ignore it, right? If you sort of just completely leave it alone and let other people build software that completely replace what you do and without your expertise and input in it. And as opposed to the people that are embracing the tools right now and, just start making do with fewer resources and are able to do more, you can be sure that those are the ones that will be keeping their jobs and will be getting promotions and so forth. So I think it's really this interesting dynamic that we're in this moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We've adopted a phrase that says AI will not take your job as an accountant, but an accountant with AI will take your job.
100%. Yeah, for sure. I do think there's, and I don't know if you have a view on this, Tom, but I think there are some interesting implications for the talent pipeline as we're going through this, in the sense that, yes, you can use AI for certain things, and then really dive into the parts that are higher up the value chain, as you say, and in the advisory and strategic capabilities. But what does that mean for people sort of, going up to that level of expertise, and how do you get people to that point? So I'm curious if you have a point of view on the education part of this.
We're having a lot of conversations about that. In fact, we've been using a diagram that says we used to be a pyramid structure as a profession, right? A lot of people at the very bottom working their way up, and they get to the higher till they get to the top, whether a CFO or a partner or whatever. And we're saying what's happening, and this has been ongoing anyhow, technology has already been automating accounting pre-AI. That's just accelerating because of AI. So that's one piece of it. So that would be cutting off one of the triangle bottoms at the end, if you will. And then we've been offshoring or outsourcing overseas work a lot of times to do labor arbitrage. So that's cutting off the other wing of that. So we're now ending up with what we call like a fat diamond shape. And to your point, what we believe is that we'll start to see like simulations and other ways of learning. We're already doing it in a lot of our work, where it's all about case studies and scenarios. So we'll begin to introduce those higher level concepts at an earlier level, but in a safe environment where they're just doing it in a scenario versus live data. And then they learn that to move on the job. And then with mentoring, then begin to do that. Like we have an apprenticeship, the first one for finance and accounting right now in the United States, that's helping do that, learn it in one way in a safe area, and then apply it with a mentor on the job and begin to basically upskill faster, if you will. That's kind of what we're thinking right now.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
But it is going to be, I mean, we think it's going to be a growing problem as this stuff moves through the wave even faster.
Yeah, I can imagine. Absolutely.
So now let's talk about that. So what happens if you get higher adoption? I know you talked about this idea that higher adoption leads to salary premiums, even for roles with lower exposure. how does this translate to finance and accounting?
Yeah, I think it's really this notion that you just mentioned, right? That AI won't take your job, but someone with the expertise and AI might. So this idea that people that it's logical, right? If you have two people doing the same exact thing, and one person knows a tool that happens to make them 20% more productive, then that will be reflected in salary and promotion rates. I think that's just simple math there. I think what's interesting are the downstream implications in labor demand, and whether we'll actually sort of see sort of a shift in how many at a certain level accountants you will need. And the same is of course true for data scientists and software engineers, where right now a lot of people are already attributing a lot of the slower hiring in tech, for example, to the boom in AI, and just people doing so much more with fewer headcounts. I don't know whether that's already what we're seeing, or whether that's just sort of the current state of the labor market and world that we're in. But it's hard to imagine that at some point there won't be these downstream impacts, right? Where you'll probably have people using these tools gain higher salaries, and then also you'll just need sort of a smaller total amount of them, if that makes sense, because you have to split, if you don't have to split the pie with as many people.
Yeah, that's definitely there. Now, then this gets back to Gartner's predicting autonomous accounting, back to your point of this automation, meaning all those transactions will automatically go into the accounting records, be checked for accuracy, et cetera. And they're saying in the next 3 to 5 years. So what would you see as a major differentiator for accounting roles that can survive and thrive amidst this constant march towards automation?
Yeah, I think it's the things that we touched on already, where you move up the value chain, and sort of your really expertise and subject matter. Just experience, I suppose, becomes more valuable. Sure, let the system do its thing in terms of reporting and reporting anomalies, and just sort of spitting you out a thing. But then people still need help interpreting these things. I think people need help implementing certain things. You'll need, if there are irregularities, you'll need to figure out where they come from and what to do about them. So I think this part of first, of course, the human and social aspect of what people are doing, and building trust, and solving problems where they arise, that the AI tools won't be able to manage, because they might be so niche that they haven't seen them before, and yet sort of with good human reasoning you might be able to solve. So I think it's really this social aspect, the trust, and just sort of humanity to it, which I think is a huge part. And then the edge cases and the particularities that a tool trained on so and so many million data points still hasn't seen, and yet an expert might have a hunch of how to go about.
That's interesting. So tell us a little bit about, well, first of all, you've really confirmed what we've talked about, is that we're saying as AI becomes more prevalent, the human skills are going to be even more important, which we emphasize a lot. Someone's going to still have to tell the story of the numbers,
exactly,
beyond the AI, if you will. And that's what we're seeing a lot of our finance and accounting folks working on. And then even when you get to the auditors as well. How about, tell us a little bit about what you guys do there at Revelio Labs. I thought it's fascinating about how you actually pull this data. Like, tell about where the data comes from that you were talking about to me today.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're Revelio Labs. We're workforce intelligence. The goal is really to help our clients understand what employment looks like at any company. So we collect many different data sources that basically mimic what you would find in your internal HR database, essentially. So those are professional online profiles from a lot of just social platforms, then job postings data and sentiment data. So everything basically gets put together into one standardized data set that really helps us understand, how fast is a company growing, who are they hiring, what skills are they hiring for, what's their breakdown in terms of demographics, location, roles, you name it. And this data has a ton of different use cases. So a lot of our clients are in either investment management or banking or consulting to really, either drive investment decisions or, help do due diligence, anything like that. And the other big portion of our clients are in our HR specialists. So your people analytics, strategic workforce planning, talent intelligence folks that really are tasked with understanding either their internal HR and human capital or hiring, strategies for the future. So it's sort of an interesting amalgamation of different things. And I just get to, I always say I have the coolest job in the world. I just get to play around with this data and tell stories about it. So
it's pretty cool. Well, it certainly was an honor to meet you and get to talk about this. Let's finish up with what's one major takeaway for finance and accounting professionals regarding AI? Like, what should we be thinking about even more to prepare for this future?
Yeah, I think there's so many good things that AI can take off your shoulder that you probably don't like doing in the first place. So embrace that and, let it help you do the really interesting parts of your job, I think.
I like that. One of my CFOs, I use this term all the time. She says, it will be able to take away the soul-sucking, mind-numbing work that we often have to do and free us up for the really good, juicy, strategic work that our companies want us to do. So perfect from that standpoint. Lisa, thank you so much. So for all of our audience, you can get more from Lisa on her LinkedIn profile. LinkedIn, it's Lisa K. Simon. She's on Twitter at the Lisa K. Simon. And at Revelio, Revelio Labs, out there on, I guess, X as we call it now. And the website is www.revelio.labs.com, Revelio Labs. So with that, Lisa, thank you so much for being on the show with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Tom. This was very fun.
And we're going to be back. Don't miss our other Future Ready Lives back here on LinkedIn the first and third Tuesday of each month at noon Eastern. We'll see you then. Thank you.